Bingo. There we go. Right. And then I'll put the slideshow on. There we go. Go. Perfect. Right. Hello to everybody. So, for anybody who doesn't know me, I'm Nathan, 290 Oscar Charlie. And this is a talk that's, I've put the title Handhelds and Hills and Back to Basics. It's more not just about SOTA, but about the activities and what you need to do around these activities. And not just basically, let's get to point A and operate radio and then go home. Because it's not as simple as that, really. And a lot of the statistics for mountain rescue, for example, could be changed if people followed these more back to basics. You know, how are we going to get from A to B? How are we going to go from there? So I'm going to talk a lot, but if you want to ask questions as we go along, just shout up and I'm happy to answer them, or you can wait till the end and I'm certainly happy to answer them. There is going to be some stuff that I'm going to be on the website where I commercially work, which is Trespass. Just for anybody out there, no matter what I say tonight, I don't make any commission. I don't make any extra money if you buy anything from Trespass at all. I'm purely using that as a basis because I know the kit there a lot better than other brands. But it also demonstrates a point that I will get onto later on. So the first thing is what, when, and where. So the question is what are you going to do? Are you going up a hill? You're going to the lake? You're going to the local park? When are you going to do it? What season is it in? Is it in spring, summer, autumn, or winter? Because this changes exactly, you know, what you're going to do. And the where is it somewhere where you're going to be possibly exposed, or is it somewhere that's sheltered? You know, is it somewhere that you know very well, or is it somewhere where you're not going to know very well because, you know, you've traveled 4 hours to go to this place? So when you're planning these things, you've got to look at, have you done your research? Do you know where you're actually going? Because half the time you could drive for 5 hours and go, oh, that's a good hill to go up, but have no idea what the hills is. And as much as maps are useful, they don't always tell you exactly what's there, you know, what terrain is it, what's the terrain like in certain weather conditions and things like that. So it's a bit more complicated. So always ask these questions, you know, what am I doing, when am I going to do it, and where am I going to be, and what, with the where, what dangers could that be? You know, for example, if you go up the north face of Ben Nevis, you know, in wintertime you've got avalanches as possible, but then you go in summertime, it's not avalanches, but you know, you've got lots of scree that could fall on you if you don't, you know, you don't know what you're doing. The same thing with kayaking, you know, you've got the chill factor of the water. If you end up in the water, you know, you could freeze pretty quickly in certain locks at certain times of the year, quite easily. You know, so that's a danger. You know, are these locks tidal? You know, because you've got sea locks, you've got standard locks. Is there anywhere that you can get help really quickly from that place point of view? So it's all about this. So we'll allude into this more. So you've obviously got planning. So what's the purpose? You're doing SOTA, POTA, IOTA, or in the case recently, we've obviously got BOTA, which is bunkers on the air, which is a new one. So what's the purpose of what you're doing? Is it just a walk? Are you carrying extra kit for certain things? Are you going to, say, for example, in the summer, are you going to take a tent and stay overnight? So is there extra kit you need? You know, what's the purpose? The other thing is people. Is this alone or in a group? Because if it's in a group, you can share resources, which is always beneficial, but you do need to make sure that you have resources for everybody. So even though you might have an emergency survival bag, you know, have you got a group one for 2 people, or do you need one individually? Have you got enough first aid resources with you? Things like that. And what's the process? You know, what do you need to do to achieve what goal? You know, the day walk, the camp. You know, what kit changes do you need to, you know, in the process to get from A to B and to do whatever activity you want to do in the middle. If this is from kayaking, you know, to, for example, on the left at the bottom picture there is my Gold Duke of Edinburgh. We were halfway through an 8-hour day, you know, what did we need? That's actually a very good example because one of the people in the group, and you can't tell from the picture, was diabetic. So he required insulin every morning and every evening. We had to make sure that as a group that he was, you know, had some food, you know, he wasn't having, you know, issues with his insulin intake and things like that. because, you know, at the end of the day, we all want to achieve the goal, Duke of Edinburgh, at the end of the day and get the expedition done, but we don't want to kill someone halfway through. So there's things like that. What are the extra things that you may acquire? You know, he required extra medicine. We need to make sure he had it. You know, we need to make sure he did take it in the morning. You know, he could be quite groggy in the morning after an 8-hour walk for 3 days, and has he forgotten, for example? So there's this when it comes into planning. So now the route. Now the routes, it depends on what you're doing. If you're if you're locally going for a walk in a park, you've parked at somewhere you know, you're not going to really need, you know, to plan the route particularly, especially if you're doing, for example, Pota, and you're parking in the car park and you're operating a portable setup. But for example, Sota and some of the boaters are remote, and some of the IOTAs stuff is remote. So it's pre-planning the route. This could be from local knowledge from people you go and ask, you know, and it's also like, what timings does it take? Because, you know, timings can be everything. Because especially in winter it goes darker earlier, especially in Scotland. You know, by 3-4 o'clock it's completely dark. And do you need head torches? Can you do that route in the dark, or does it become so exposed and you can't see where you're going? You've got no landmarks, so that easy you get lost. So you need to be down from the hill by 3 o'clock, for example, especially if you don't know the hill very well or you've never walked it before. So there's all sorts of things like that. It's about, you know, keeping safe within the route as well. So for a good example is Fairfield Horseshoe, giant plateau. And unless you know what you're doing by the route, you know, some parts of the edges, it's a 500 feet drop one side, it's a 600 feet drop the other side, it's a 200 feet over there, but there's 3 places you can come down safely. So for example, when I was younger, we did Air Cadet Staff Day, and there was 3 of us who had Gold Duke of Edinburgh, 2 mountain leaders, and an extra person. And we looked at the weather forecast, and it was for basically blanket fog, but there was a small weather window, so we went, okay, we'll try it. But we had ropes with us, we had all the extra safety equipment possible, and we thought it was dodgy, but we tried anyway. We got to the top, the visibility was 5 to 10 meters at most. So then we had to micro navigate off the hill. And it's stuff like that where the planning we did the day before, where we did a PowerPoint presentation with the group leader, we went through maps, went through alternative routes, what other things could we do just in case? If that route's blocked for some reason, what other routes could we take to get to a safe place where then we could call somebody for help or get somebody to give us a lift back to Ambleside, for example? There's all sorts of different routes there. And it proved that day that because we did all the planning, we did look all the routes, that we stayed safe and we did get off the hill. Unfortunately, as we were coming off the hill, we had a Ramblers group go up who lost 3 people, only had 3 maps between 30 people. And next news, Mountain Rescue were following them up the hill when we were coming down, and clearly they needed help. Unfortunately, you know, they didn't look at, you know, the route, the weather, you know, what's the possibility of, you know, issues. And it was starting to go dark as well, which didn't also help them as well. So that's a little bit on route planning. The other thing I would say with route planning is Google Maps is your friend, but it's not the be all and end all of maps. So I would use a mixture of stuff. So you could look on Google Maps to give you a rough idea of the area. Then I would still definitely look at OS Maps because they have the clearest information in terms of contour lines and things like that. And then sometimes, depending on the areas, different guidebooks. I think especially the older guidebooks that tend to be a lot more detailed in a route give you a very much more indication of, you know, what you may encounter. And then it's also what equipment to keep en route and planning. You know, you could bring a GPS, but a GPS could go wrong. You could lose battery. It could get, you know, don't be wrong, they're quite robust these days, and I'm not saying they will go wrong, but there's still the possibility of them going wrong. It's a point of failure. So have you got a compass? You know, have you got your emergency whistle? Have you got a printed out map? You know, the amount of people who rely on phones and then get themselves in trouble because their phone breaks or the phone loses signal, and then they've got no way of seeing where they're going at all, and that's just dangerous. So it's one thing, you know, you people need to look at this and go, you know, what do I actually need? You know, is this multi-day? What supplies do I need? looking at his walking pace on a map, how far you can get. Because once you know your walking pace, especially on an OS map, you can work how far you can get a day quite easily, and that'll give you a good indication of what you need equipment wise as well. The next one that's really important that most people don't realize as well is you've got weather forecasts. They're all well and good, but the normal generic weather forecasts mean absolutely nothing when you get up in the hills. They are completely useless. You need to look at the mountain weather forecast as a minimum thing, and don't necessarily take it with a pinch of salt, but give yourself some breathing room. If it's on the edge, don't bother. It's as simple as that, because the weather in the mountains can turn on a sixpence. And if it's on the edge, it's not a thing to do. If you've got a bit of headroom from, where the bad weather is, and it's, you've got, a couple 100 meters between you and what, the next bad weather window is, then you're okay. But really look at these details, because they will tell you what the wind chill factor is on there, what's the likelihood of snow at that level at that time of year. There's numerous, issues. It could be raining, it could be fog up there. And as I say, the weather's so changeable, it will show you hour by hour on a day what's the possibility to change it, especially on the high Scottish mountains. The Lake District and Wales are probably the key ones. There is the North Pennines and the Southern Pennines as well. There's something definitely still to take into account no matter what, but I would definitely certainly take care on the really high Scottish Lake District and the Welsh mountains by far, because above a certain amount of meters, they're pretty much deadly if the weather's changed and you haven't got the right equipment on you. And there's plenty of people a year who, suffer, unfortunately, fatalities because they don't take the weather into account. And this happens every year, unfortunately. But the main topic I want to cover tonight, actually, is about clothing. And my first thing to anybody who's looking to do anything outdoors, it is not a fashion statement. It is not about how it looks good. It's how it's performed, how it protects you. What equipment do you need to survive? It's as simple as that. I mean, yes, our skin is waterproof, but if you're exposed, that's hypothermia. You could die from that. Exposure with frost, you could get frostbite. You could die from that. It's as simple as that. And I know it's a bit morbid, but if people don't seem to understand this, that's what can happen. And this is how accidents happen. This is how mine rescue end up being called out. This is how people have fatalities on the mountains. It's as simple as that. So as I say, clothing is not a fashion statement. What different clothing do you need? There's different types of clothing. There's different layering systems. What's best for you? How buying clothing. And the main one that really, as part of somebody who's in the outdoor retail industry, ratings, it's the classic that people don't ask. They go, is it waterproof? And I go, well, yes, but do you understand how waterproof it is? Because that makes a big difference between whether you're going up a mountain or whether you're going to be about in town and traveling, literally walking between your car and your house and your car and the shops and your car and the school, for example. There's very different systems. So the two pictures below kind of reiterate what's going on here. So we've got the column of water here. So this is the standard rating system. No matter what brand you buy from, no matter what type of membrane you have, it's gone through the system. If it has a waterproof rating, it would have done this test. So basically, they get the fabric, they stick it underneath at the bottom for an hour. They fill it up to the millimeter head pressure rating that they want to basically to qualify in waterproofing. And the minimum is 2,000 millimeters for any waterproof jacket. Doesn't matter what it is. If it's under 2,000 millimeters, it's maybe water resistant, but it's not waterproof. It's as simple as that. And then anything above 2,000 millimeters is the different levels of waterproofing. And basically, as long as it can last at that head pressure for an hour, that's it. That's its waterproof rating. It's as simple as that. And this is where I have issues with it. So we'll go on to that more. But in this picture, shows a layering system. You could do more, you could do less, but this is what I would say is an average layering system for most times of the year. I'd probably take maybe one layer out of that in summer, And in winter, you could probably add another layer depending on how cold it is. So the reason for the layering system, and this is an important thing that a lot of people don't understand. I get a lot of customers who come to me and say, well, can I just not wear one big outer jacket with the t-shirt? And I go, if you do that, you'll go halfway up a mountain, you'll sweat, you'll feel really, really hot. You'll take off the outer layer, feel like, oh, yes, I've got a great temperature now. But unfortunately, now you're exposed. You'll get cold very quickly because the sweat will condense and go cold because it's liquid, and it'll absorb all the cold air really quickly and make you really, really cold. And all that end up happening is you get hypothermia, you feel like you're still hot, and then you try and take off more layers, and then you get exposed more, and then mountain rescue will be coming to come and rescue if someone finds you. And that's the simple answer, and you probably end up in hospital. So the layering system is good because basically it means as you get too hot or too cold, you can take off mid layers in between while still keeping yourself insulated. So, for example, you could have a t-shirt and a fleece on, and you're out of waterproof. You get a bit of cold, so now you put on the down jacket. Now you get a bit hot again, you take the down jacket off, but you feel like that the fleece is not quite what you want. So you take the fleece off, put the down layer back on, and put the outer jacket layer on if it's still raining, for example. You get to camp, it's not raining anymore, so I take my outer layer off, but I've still got a t-shirt, a fleece, and a down layer on. So that way you're still keeping yourselves warm. The other thing to mention as well, no matter what time of year, even in summer, when it's windy and it's cold day, your head, you lose 80% pretty much of your body heat from your head. You don't have to all the time, but I would suggest always carrying a beanie just in case. No matter what. In winter, I would always wear it. Or even if you don't like beanies, the other good option in summer is if you take a neck tube, so a buff, and you turn it inside out and twist it completely, and then fold it in on itself, and it becomes a nice beanie. And then it's nice and light. You can get merino wool beanies as well that are quite light if you prefer something that's not heavy, but still got all the properties of a heavy beanie. Gloves are a must. I would always say like a light pair of gloves and then a heavier set of gloves. And if you're in winter, maybe a light pair of gloves and then ski gloves, just because of snow, wet. You want something that's nice and waterproof because woolen gloves are useless in the mountains because they'll absorb water and that will again expose your hands to cold and possibly give you frostbite if they get really, really cold, even in a wet glove. You think the glove's actually helping you, but it's actually probably making it worse. So you want something that's a waterproof glove, stopping the moisture getting to you, your hand getting exposed and things like that. So what I'll do now is I'll end the presentation, but what I will do is go to this. So when I was mentioning about what kit to get, there's a few important things to think about is what's your price range? What are you doing? And is it an investment? Is it something you're going to do once? What risks do you want to take? So a lot of the time customers come to me and they might say, well, I'm going walking up, say, Damayat, for example, it's a 1 pointer hill. And I go, okay, that's fine. So for the day trip, a 5 to 10,000 rated jacket, and I'll explain in a minute what I mean, will be fine for the day as long as it's in summer, it's not really bad weather, and you're not going up there in winter when it's snowing. And that'll be fine as long as it's one that you can layer underneath up and down, depending on whether you want you need to stay warm and not exposed. I'm not going to give them a 5 to 10,000 rated jacket that's a big parka puffer. It's not appropriate for the hills. But then I talk to them a bit more and they go, well, I'm doing this one first, but I plan on maybe doing 5-6 other hills. And I go, well, that's all well and good, but if you end up in higher hills, you need something that's more appropriate for them. So it's not necessarily selling up to them. That's what I'm trying to do there, but it's trying to make sure that they're not going to try and use what I would say kit is appropriate for Damayat, that's say 400-meter hill, and then do up on 1,000+ meter hills because they're not appropriate. It's not the same thing. Yes, they might have the same breathability, but certainly the waterproofness isn't there. And it's not necessarily when you get up to higher waterproofness, it's not about how waterproof it is, it's how long it will last at the head pressure that it's at. because the higher you go, the more waterproof it will last for longer. Where the lower the waterproofing, it won't last as long against heavy torrential rain and things like that. Now, the issue I have is I get a lot of customers come in who say, I want a Gore-Tex jacket. Now, Trespass, the brand I work for, don't do Gore-Tex. But the problem is that I have with this is I go to them, this is an equivalent jacket to Gore-Tex at this millimeter rating. But the irony is Gore-Tex have got themselves so popular that they don't actually give out the millimeter ratings at all. So when someone buys a Gore-Tex, it could be a standard Gore-Tex, it could be a Gore-Tex Pro, it could be a Gore-Tex Pack Light, it could be a Gore-Tex Pack Light Plus. They actually don't know what the millimeter ratings are. So they're not comparable. So when you look at other brands, you can't compare. So the problem is someone could end up going to, for example, when it loads, it was loaded. Come on, right, there we go. Going here and spending 200 quid on a jacket. Now it's got Pack Light, Gore-Tex Pack Light there, but if you look at any of the technical details, it says absolutely nothing of actually how waterproof it is. The only bit you get with Gore-Tex is this, which is the denier rating. So this is how tough the fabric is. So this has a 40 denier, which is not too bad. And it says a DWR rating, but most jackets will have a DWR coating of some description. So you go to this and it goes, well, that's that, but I can't compare. You know, you don't know what Gore-Tex you're getting. I go to another website, for example, and you go on this one and it's got it here. But again, it says, you know, it's waterproof and water repellent, but it's Gore-Tex. It's supposed to be waterproof, but it doesn't actually specify how waterproof it is. And yet they tell you you need to spend £400 on that jacket. But why? How waterproof is it? What is it designed for? Now, unfortunately, it's something the bigger brands get away with, and it's, I think, something that needs to change. But we won't get into that. So again, this is another one. This is Montaigne. This is another brand. But again, it's Gore-Tex. It's got a bit more detail here. So it's got a higher denier rating on the shoulders and hips and elbows, which makes sense. They're the more movable parts. So that's why it would have a heavier denier rating, because you know you're going to rub against these things a lot more. Your bag's going to rub on your shoulders. You want them to be more robust. But again, it doesn't say, you know, it's Gore-Tex Pro now, so it's clearly up from Gore-Tex General, but how waterproof is it? So after a bit of looking, I finally got to Rab's website, and it's a Gore-Tex jacket. But luckily in this one, it actually specifies the head pressure rating. And it is one of only 4 websites I go to that specify it. So it's got a 7 denier rating. It says Gore-Tex leaf rate, but it says it's 28,000 millimeters. Now, for a generalized customer, luckily for me, I obviously work in this industry. I can go and do my research. I have an understanding of what different things are. But an average customer is never going to know that in a million years. So for anybody watching here is do your research. It's important, because even if it says Gore-Tex, doesn't say what it is 99% of the time. You need to understand the different levels. So you got your Gore-Tex Pro, your Pack Lights, your Pack Light Plus, and onwards. Yes, you could pay for a more expensive jacket, but that doesn't mean it's more waterproof. So, for example, we'll go to Trespass. So this is DLX, and DLX is basically Trespass's high brand, and it has what they call a DLX Trex membrane. So the membrane is made at the exact same factory that Gore-Tex membrane is made of, because most of the waterproof membranes in the UK and around the world are pretty much all made in the same factory. There's not many that aren't. And then once they're made at that factory, they then get to the different places. It's the same factory Barbara gets all their stuff from, for example. But the difference is Trespass will just make it clear. It's 20,000 millimeters. And on every single label in the store, it has the millimeter rating to make it exactly clear. Same with gloves, same with beanies, same with any clothing. Doesn't matter. It will have a millimeter rating. The only exceptions, and I will state this clearly, soft shell, it has a millimeter rating, but in 99% of any of the brands you go to, they do not seal the seams on soft shell. The reason being is it's a stretch fabric. And if you go between a fleece and waterproof, soft shell sits right in the middle between the two. So it is treated as a waterproof, but it's actually the seams aren't sealed on them on purpose. It's not designed to be a fully waterproof jacket. The fabric is rated waterproof, but the seams are not. That's the only thing that a lot of companies don't make clear. It's the same with the soft shell trousers. But 99% of the time, unless you've got the really heavy driven rain, most things won't go through the seals because obviously they stitch them so tight. And the waterproof fabric will do its job. But for example, there, so we'll go back to this one. So we know it's 28,000, right? But 99% of people who end up in the mountain, unless they're doing stream ski, are not going to need 28,000. So that's 460 quid. And this is generally most of the year round, this is how much it is. So 20,000 rated jacket, it's only 8,000 less, but it will do for 99% of people, and it's 129 quid. Now, I'm not saying that's for everybody. You know, people like brands because, for example, Rab, if anything goes wrong, you can send it back to Rab and they will repair it for you. If something goes wrong with Trespass and it's within a year, you know, they can return, you know, we'll exchange it, refund it, whatever. But if it's beyond that, we're not there to repair it. You're going to have to send that to a specialist and pay for it. There's a difference. But the average person who goes in the Gold Duke of Edinburgh, unless their parents have infinite amounts of money, is not going to spend 460 quid on a jacket. And this is what frustrates me because Gore-Tex, they rely on their brand to bring people in, but they don't specify too much to brands to specify the head pressure. So there's no easy comparable between brands. And it's not because I don't agree with Gore-Tex is a great membrane and a great thing, but it makes it harder for people who maybe just getting into walking and don't understand all the jargon. You know, if they can look at a millimeter rating, there's an easy comparable between brands, between membranes. It makes life easy, more coherent. And the irony is, Gore-Tex have to go through the exact same tests as everybody else does. So they have this data, but they refuse to share it easily. Back in the day, 20 years ago, they did. It was on their website, it was clear. But now you can't find it. It just doesn't exist. Or it's very hard to find. In case of Rab, you know, they've made it clear. But there's very few brands that do. So with that, I think that's the end of my talk. I know I've chucked a lot of information at people, so anybody ask away of any questions they have, and I'll try and answer them to the best of my ability. And I'll stop screen sharing as well. That would help. There we go.
You hit with a deafening silence there.
I know.
I'll give you an anecdote.
Go for it.
You've talked very well about all sorts of things and doing the ultimate, but don't forget that most people will own something suitable.
Yeah.
So you can design where you're going with by looking in your wardrobe. So
yes.
Have a look at your kit that you've got and say, is that suitable for the top of Ben Nevis, or is it a low-lying hill somewhere? Probably a low-lying hill. So that's your target where you're going to go. The same generally with stuff you're going to carry and stuff you're going to pack. Generally, most people have it, and if they haven't got it, somebody that knows got it, so they can borrow it.
Yeah.
Because the last thing you want to do is go out and spend a large amount of money when you need to spend it on radios, you know.
Yeah, especially as you say, you know, people want to spend things on other things. I mean, there is some out there, I know for a fact that there's some scout groups that do lending of kit, and they have a mass amount of kit that they keep and they lend. I know they're trying to set one currently up in Stirling. I don't know if they've got that far yet with it, because obviously they came to me to ask to quote for things. You know, for the scout group as a whole, so they could lend them out to the public and use them themselves for the group. It's one of these things where it's a balancing act. You know, are you going to use it so many times a year that it's worth you investing, or is it something that you can borrow from somebody because you're only going to do it as a once-off thing? Is like there's a lot of these charity walks where, you know, people will spend, you know, hundreds of pounds on jackets, and they really don't. They just need to find somebody who they know who might have a jacket that's appropriate for that. You know, I'm not trying to do myself out of sales here, but at the end of the day, you know, everybody's got a budget to work to, and I'm not here to, you know, buy the most expensive thing because that helps me and get my store budget. You know, I'd rather people be on the hill with the right kit, you know, and if they can't afford it, is there somebody who can help them to just borrow it while they go on the hill? because I'd rather them have the right kit and be safe on the hill. So unless anybody's got any other questions, I'll stop the recording here if that's okay.
I've got one question actually.
Go for it.
You've gone through quite a lot of do's and don'tsy type stuff. Do you, or is there a commonly available usable kind of checklisty type of thing that you would recommend as a I'm off to the mountains, here's my absolutely must do this, and this, and check for that as a kind of a systematic planning?
I'd say there's multiple resources out there. The internet is your friend in terms of if you search for kit list doing XYZ, it'll come up. But what I would personally do is get that kit list, take it to someone who you know knows what they're doing, and then ask them and go, actually, out of this kit list, what do I actually need? Because it's people's experience that will actually give you the best information more than the internet, because some internet will underprepare you for stuff and stuff will over prepare you for it. So for a good example is that a lot of the Gold Duke of Edinburgh list will say bring a bin bag as a bag liner, and I go, no, you don't need to do that. You've already got on that kit a survival bag. That is a perfectly good bag liner that you could use. And then when you need it in an emergency, then you can take it out your bag and then use it as a survival bag. You can use 2 items in one. You don't need to carry anything extra. So it's things like that. There's just little things like that. And then the other thing I would say as well is what a lot of kit lists don't mention as well. For example, say you're carrying a big 66-litre rucksack and it's quite heavy with stuff and you're not used to it. And it starts chucking it down all of a sudden. By the time you've took your bag off and you've got then your rain cover on and you put your bag back on, everything inside your bag is pretty much soaked unless you have a bag liner. So what I always suggest to people, especially doing multiple day Duke of Edinburgh, is not necessarily bronze, but this could be silver, gold, is to buy not necessarily the welded sealed dry bags, but dry bags that are tape sealed. So what they can do is get different color dry bags, a 5 litre, a 10 litre, another 5 litre that's a different color, and then put food in one, put camping equipment in one, put clothing in the other. One, it organizes their bag so they know where things are, which helps them to get things out faster. But also, if they haven't had the time to get off and put the rain cover on, even if the bag liner leaks, the stuff's still dry. So it's things like that, which, but you need experience to know that. So as I say, get a generic kit list online and then ask somebody who's experienced, or even go to, for example, an outdoor store. Most outdoor stores will have somebody who's experienced enough who can tell you this information. And if they're a decent outdoor store, they won't try and sell you anything, but they will tell you all the information you need. And that's what I strive for my staff to do as well as myself. I don't care whether I'm selling you something or not. At the end of the day, I want you to be safe on the mountains and not be another statistic for mountain rescue. End of story. So you come with a kit list and you ask me questions, I have no problem. I might have an issue if I've got 30 people in a queue and it's Christmas, but generally most times of the year, you come and ask me, I am happy enough to answer any questions, and any decent outdoor store will. No matter whether you're a customer who's spending £8 on, like a bottle of smidge, or you're spending £200 on a jacket, if you've got a question about what you're packing and where you're going, they're the people to ask, because they live it day in and day out, and they'll know better than most. So that would be my answer, really.
Sounds good.
Anybody else got any questions? Right, with that then, I will call it due, and then we'll have a general chat.